Hello, gunfighters and aspiring gunfighters. Welcome back to Gunfighter Life. As always, the podcast where we get together as men and talk about guns, gunfighting, ammo, things related to that, from a Judeo Christian worldview, while providing a first hand real world perspective. I think today's episode is going to be entitled On Paper. And I think a lot of Americans, a lot of us in this gun culture and gun community, especially me when I was younger, we buy guns or choose a caliber based on what's on paper. And the art and the science of shooting, the talent of shooting, the gift of shooting is more than just what's written on a page. And you might be cutting yourself short if you only go by what's on paper. But enough of that. We'll talk more about that when we get into the main subject of today's episode. I'm going to throw in the bio. If you want to skip it, you can skip to about 4 minutes, and then you should get through the majority of the bio if you've heard it before or you just don't care. Before you skip ahead, though, if you don't mind giving a like, subscribe, and writing a review of the podcast while you're listening, that'd be great. Also, quick housekeeping. If you listen to the Revolver Rounds episode, my bad on that. Still trying to learn the audio editing. I uploaded a file and it didn't sound too good, so I went back and tried to edit it. So if you wanted to re-listen to that in better audio quality, you can go back and try and do that. With that, I'll plug in the bio and then we'll get into the episode. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I make no apologies for that. It is first and foremost in my life, the greatest of all the commandments. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. I don't apologize for that. I am an alpha male, and as such I follow the ultimate male, the ultimate alpha male, the greatest man that ever lived, Jesus Christ. A little bit about my background. In addition to that, I am veteran. I've been to war. I served in both the United States Marine Corps in the infantry and the United States Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Joined at 17, went to war more than once. I also served in law enforcement. I worked as a police officer in LAPD doing patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, tracking down fugitives and those kind of jobs. So by God's grace, I've made it through some nasty places and times overseas and some dangerous streets in the States. Not because I'm better than any of the men that didn't, but because God chose to have mercy and grace on me. To God be the glory. I also served as a private contractor for the U.S. government, for an agency I won't specify. By God's grace, He got me through all that. In addition to that, I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember, both rifle and pistol. Mostly pistol are most of my competition and championship wins. But I have also competed in, muzzle loader, archery, shotgun, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've been very blessed with those talents, and I try and use them and multiply them. I've done quite a bit of hunting and outdoor, I guess we'd say, survival type activities, hunting and fishing all over this beautiful country. I have been a professional hunter and guide. Not many people today can see they've been a professional exotic and big game hunter of things like bison and exotic animals, but I have been one, and I'm very blessed for that. I've also gone out into the wilderness, by God's grace, with a Bible and a shotgun, and not just survived, but thrived. Also a professional firearms instructor. For the United States Marine Corps, I was an urban warfare and desert warfare instructor under a Mojave Viper. I'm also a FBI certified firearms instructor and have been for a lot of years. I'm certified by some other three-letter government agency, NRA certified instructor, and I have taught at one of the big-name firearms shooting academies in the country. So I've been very blessed to win many competitions and be a shooting instructor for military, law enforcement, and civilians. I have served as a commander of a tactical team. My current full-time job is as a leader of a tactical team. Primary mission is to stop active shooters in a fairly large metropolitan area. Alright guys, with that, let's get into today's topic, on paper. I'll start this off by telling a story. When I was a young man, I didn't mention the bio, but even before joining the Marine Corps, I was a lifeguard. So, sitting in my lifeguard chair, I would read a giant book on guns, and it had a ballistics chart in it. And I studied, I don't know how many hours looking at that ballistics chart, all these numbers on paper. And I was on the East Coast, east of the Mississippi. White-tailed deer, black bear was about the biggest thing I was probably going to hunt in that environment. But I was looking at this ballistics chart, this ballistics table, and I had decided that, the 7mm Remington Magnum was where it was at. Never shot one. I don't know that I'd ever even seen the cartridge in person. But I had decided, saving up money as a lifeguard, that this was, the rifle, the predominant rifle that was going to be best for me. So I found a Ruger M77 all-weather stainless, very nice rifle. Saved up for it. Went to the gun store, had my mom buy it for me because I may have been too young at the time to actually legally purchase a rifle. So anyway, I got this rifle, and on paper it was great. And it was a very fine rifle. Flat shooting, hard hitting, all that other stuff. But keep in mind, I'm hunting east of the Mississippi, mostly in the swamp or, environments like that. The longest shot I was likely to ever take was under 100 yards. And I was mostly going to be hunting white-tailed deer in the south. On paper, that looked like the best caliber for me. But I've actually gone out and shot. If you've ever shot a 7mm Rem Mag, I don't think you're going out and shooting, 50 to 100 rounds a day in a practice session. And if you heard my bio, I like to shoot. I would have been better off getting that rifle in, 7.62 39 or getting it in 308 Winchester or what I would consider one of the more boring, bland cartridges of the time, 25-06 even. Heck, even the old standby 30-06. It's not exciting, it's not new, but if I just wanted to go out and shoot, probably the 308 or something like it would have been the best choice, or even the 243 would have probably been a great choice. But the numbers on paper weren't as good. And the story of that rifle ends sadly. My best friend took a deer with it. I loaned it to him when I joined the Marine Corps to use, and it got stolen out of his brother's pickup truck. So I never shot a living animal with that gun, I don't think. Fast forward to the world that we now live in 2021. And I'm in charge of professional gunfighters, myself being most of my adult life as a professional gunfighter. And I see guys talking about, the next thing they should get. And a lot of times, it's based on what's on paper. Let me preface this with, I love all my guys, and I certainly don't have it all figured out. And I can certainly see where they're coming from. And I don't just see that in them. It's probably even more prevalent for people, sitting at home looking at a gun magazine. Do people still do that? I guess I'm a little bit older. When I was a kid, I just looked at gun magazines before there was, internet forums and Instagram and all that stuff. But anyway, a lot of people, I think, magazine capacity, in their mind on paper, it's super important that one gun holds 15 rounds and one gun holds 17 rounds and the other magazine holds 19 rounds. And we're talking about guns. And as I said in the bio, I'm the leader of a tactical team, so it's not really, hypothetical for me. It's a world that I live in. And they were talking, somebody mentioned but that one has more magazine capacity. And I said to them, in what scenario do you envision dumping 100 rounds, assuming you carry a couple mags on your war belt, and not solving the problem? In what scenario do you envision that actually happening if you're being a good marksman and actually hitting your target? Is it possible? Yes. Should it be on the top 20 things of criteria and what you look for? I don't think so. It's much more important to me that I can hit with the first round, because the first round is exponentially more important than the 15th or the 18th round in your magazine. The odds of you dumping your entire magazine, and I say dumping because you're probably not using good marksmanship if you went through an entire magazine. Probably. We train, after a couple body shots to move to the head for a reason. But if you went through an entire magazine, it's likely because you're not hitting, not because you don't have enough magazine capacity. That's the problem. Don't try and fix a software problem with a hardware solution. If your marksmanship's not there, don't try and make up for it with a big magazine capacity. Become a better shooter. Much more important that you hit with your first round, your second round, your third round, your fourth round. Much more important to me on a handgun that it has a good trigger, that it fits my hand properly. I don't mean that it feels good. I mean that, when the front sight is aligned all the way back to my shoulder, that I can put my finger on the trigger and it reaches the center of the pad to the center of the trigger and I can pull it straight back, allowing me to hit my target consistently, quickly, accurately. That's so much more important to me than shoving an extra 2 or 3 rounds in the magazine. And I get marketing, and I get that, and there's nothing wrong with it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against high-capacity magazines. I think you should have whatever capacity magazine you want. I don't think that there should be any kind of regulation on that. But what I'm saying is that should not be in your top criteria for what weapon that you get. Would you rather have a concealed carry gun that fits your hand well, that points naturally for you, that, you hit consistently, quickly with your first, second, third round? Or would you rather have one that doesn't do that, where you get an extra 5 rounds in the magazine? I'm not telling you not to consider magazine capacity, but I'm saying check it with reality and how important it really is. Likewise, I was talking this week about the 40 cal round, and I've never been a big fan of the 40 cal round. If you like it, that's fine. When I became a police officer, my first issued duty gun was a Glock 22. I quickly moved to the 45 and then moved to the 9mm long before it was the hot trend. Mostly because I learned how to shoot better and better, and the better I learned how to shoot, the more I thought the 9mm was the way to go. And like I said, this was way back when 40 cal was still the hot thing, and if you were a cop, you ran a 40 cal, and it was very much bucking the trend to go to 9mm. This was long before the FBI looked at the data and decided to go back to the 9mm. But I realized that, on paper the 40 looks great, but if you run it on a drill and actually shoot a realistic sized target, that I could get several more rounds in the same amount of time with 9mm than I could with a 40. And I could shoot it more accurately, and I could reload for it or buy ammo for it more effectively. And would I rather practice and shoot twice as much 9mm or half as much 40 or 45? So on paper, the 40 looks great, but I'd rather be a better marksman. I'd rather be able to hit my target with a 9mm and train with a 9mm and be confident with a 9mm than something that looks better on paper, but in reality doesn't serve me as well. That being said, I do often nowadays run a 1911 Colt 45 at work. Not because it's a 45, and certainly not because of the magazine capacity, but because it shoots well for me, it points well for me, its trigger is excellent. Since it's a 1911 platform, if I switch between that and my STI, 2011s and 9mm with a 21 or 26 round capacity, the training is very linear. And that is important to me, much more than what looks good on paper, what's the next new hot thing. My problem with the 40 cal round, going back to that, is not so much that it's not a decent round, it's that when they manufacture it in a gun, they take a 9mm sized gun and they shove a 40 into it, which I think is the wrong approach. Because again, on paper it looks good. Oh, it's this lightweight 9mm sized gun with 40 caliber power. Until you shoot it, and the recoil is snappy and very uncontrollable. And would you rather be able to dump 2 rounds of 40 in somebody or 6 rounds of 9mm into somebody in the same amount of time? And unless you actually get out and shoot and run it on a clock with a timer, you don't really know. It seems like on paper, the 40 cal, like, oh yeah, why wouldn't you go with that? Like I said, until you actually shoot it, and then you shoot it and you have to adjust your grip almost every time you shoot it because it's so snappy. Or somebody's shutting their eyes or blinking when they're pulling the trigger because of the recoil. If you'd have taken that and not worried about what was on paper and taken that round and put it into something, a large frame gun like a 1911, that's heavier, that can control that recoil, because there's no free lunch. That recoil is going into 2 places. It's either going into the gun and getting absorbed or going into your hand. It's actually doing both, but the heavier the gun is, in general, all the other things being equal, and they're generally not, but all other things being equal, that gun will absorb more of the recoil. So if you'd have put it in like a 1911 size gun, I don't have a problem with the 40. In fact, that's what a lot of competition shooters do in some divisions where it's advantageous. See a very similar thing to this in plus P ammo. Somebody looks at, they're picking a duty round, and this one's 100 and 9mm 124 grain, and this one's 124 grain plus P. Well, it's got more power. Why wouldn't I just pick that one? Because on paper, it's got higher numbers. Why wouldn't you? Well, because when you shoot it in real life, you're doing what you should be doing in testing to make sure that the round you're carrying to defend your life actually hits in the right place as to your practice ammo, and you find out that the plus P does not shoot in the same place or even close to in the same place as the ammo that you're probably practicing with, unless you're practicing with plus P ammo. Do you want a round that's got a little bit more power that doesn't shoot where you're aiming, or do you want a round that's shooting in the same place as your practice ammo that you're hitting your target with? I'm not telling you to not shoot plus P ammo. I'm saying there's more to it than just numbers on paper. I, in general, don't run plus P ammo for that reason. And I know that most guys, when I issue duty ammo, most guys, when they go out and shoot, they're going to shoot, the cheapest ammo that they can buy to shoot and practice with. If I issue them plus P, they're probably not going out and buying plus P ammo to practice with. I'd rather have them hit where they're shooting. To me, that's more important. The trend in the concealed carry world with these high capacity, super small 9mm 380 size guns coming out, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's great, but don't assume that just because it's a new hot gun and it holds a few more rounds, it is better than what you have for you. Like we talked about, there's no free lunch. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. If that gun is thinner, let's say you have two 9mm, subcompact guns. If one is thinner, then that recoil is going to be concentrated into a thinner area, and that's going to go into your hand into a thinner area. I'm not telling you not to get those guns. I'm just telling you consider that. It's not like it's only an advantage. If the gun is thinner, that's also concentrating that recoil into a smaller area. Do you want to be able to shoot more accurately and faster? Is that more important to you, or do you want a couple more rounds in the magazine? Or if you have, a gun that you shoot very well, let's say you got a Smith & Wesson M&P Shield. Great gun, great concealed carry gun, been around a long time. I don't own one, but they're a great gun. Let's say you have that and you shoot it and you practice with it and you're great with it. Just because the new next hot thing comes out that holds a few more rounds, does that mean you should go and jump to it because it looks better on paper? I would say only if you shoot it better, only if you're quicker and more accurate, with it. It might make you feel better that it holds a few more rounds, but what's going to win the fight is if you hit with your first couple of rounds quickly. In general, the vast majority of the time, the first person to get a good hit is going to win that fight. The odds that your first 1 or 2 rounds get on target quickly, in my opinion, is much more important that you have an 11th or 12th or 13th round. I'm not saying that's not important. I'm just saying that, in my opinion, it is less important. And again, I'm not telling you not to get plus PM or not to get these new, next generation concealed carry handguns. I'm just saying don't feel like that what's on paper is the only thing that's important. Another thing on paper I've noticed is, I saw this in the hunting community a lot. I've seen it in the tactical community, with things like optics, with scopes. We're in America, we always think like more is better, bigger is better. That's kind of our default. So if somebody's getting a scope, they're thinking, oh, this one's got more power. It must be better. Well, no, in fact, it could be a detriment. The more you magnify something in general, the more time it takes you, in general, this is generality, but in general, the more time it takes you to acquire your target. So do you want to find your target and get a hit quickly, or do you want it to be bigger and it take you longer to hit it in your field of vision, your field of view? Which one of those? Also, a lot of times people will say, oh, these two were on paper, they're the same price. This one's, a 1 to 4, and this one's a 1 to 8, a 1 to 10, or whatever. This one must be better. Until you look at it, and I've done this looking at one brand of scope versus another brand of scope that was higher power side by side. And even though technically it was a higher power, the optical quality was not as good, and I could see a distant target better with 4 power with one brand than I could with 8 power with another brand. So on paper, it looks like, oh, the 8 power, I must be able to shoot farther and see farther, until you hold it up to your face and everything's blurred together because the optical quality is crap. Or not crap, but it's not as good as the other brand. I would rather have a sharp, crisp, clear 4 power than a kind of fuzzy, what is that thing way out there with an 8 power? Or talking about optics, this one's got super fancy, twisty, turrets to speed dial, my range and my target. Well, that's fine if you're actually going to do that, and if you're not going to carry it in an environment where you might bump those turrets off, your scope adjustment off. Just because it has all those extra features, and I've been through all this. I did this when I was younger, and I was, doing this stuff. This scope's got this, and this scope's got that, and you can quickly dial this and that. Is that more important, or is it more important that scope is simple, rugged, and I can dial it in and zero it at 50 yards, and at anything from 50 to 225 yards, I can put the reticle on the target and pull the trigger and hit it. And I don't have to worry about anything getting, spun around or dialed this way or dialed that way. I guess it's always a possibility that your scope could get bumped off of 0 if you drop it or bang it or something like that. But the simpler something is in general, the less likely that is to happen. So which one of those things is more important? Also with reticles. You might see one with just a regular crosshair, old school, what you consider old school reticle, duplex reticle or something like that. And one may have this super fancy ballistic drop reticle with a Christmas tree, and it looks like, Christmas lights vomited inside the scope. And there's all this stuff, and you may think, oh, all that stuff's super cool, let me get that. And that stuff may be useful, but is that stuff going to be more useful or more of a hindrance? Are you actually going to get out with that load, with that gun, with that reticle, and figure out your drop-off at, 2, 3, 4, 500 yards? Your wind calls those distances with that reticle, with that power. Be honest, are you going to do all that stuff? Because if not, then the simple reticle is probably better. Because something has more features on paper, if you don't use them are not an advantage, and if they get in the way, they're actually a detriment. Well, another thing we'll talk about on paper, we think more is better and bigger is better usually until it comes to ammo and cost, and a lot of people are like, oh, what's cheaper? That's what I'm going to get. Price per round, that's the only thing. So they'll get on AmmoSeek. If you don't know about that, it's like a gun search. It's like a search engine for mostly ammo, but also magazines and guns and stuff like that. AmmoSeek. They'll get on that or something similar, one of the big websites, and they'll look for the cheapest price they can get on, let's say, 9mm. And they get the crappiest ammo that they can find. Steel-cased, bimetal jacket. If you don't know, a lot of that steel-cased ammo is not just the case that's steel, which I wouldn't consider to be very good, but the bullet jacket, it looks like copper, but a lot of times in that cheaper ammo, it's actually a steel or iron jacket, just colored or coated with a thin wash of copper to make it look copper. But you have a steel or iron bullet jacket ripping through a steel or iron barrel with rifling. You can determine for yourself whether or not that's a wise thing to do. So they'll have a super nice gun and they'll shoot this crap ammo with this hard steel that, could wear out an extractor or could damage a gun barrel or something like that. Because on paper it was cheaper. And think about, I'm not telling you can't buy that kind of ammo, but is your goal to just go to the range and turn a bunch of money into noise and just shoot a bunch of rounds down range somewhere safely? If you want to do that, that's fine, but, this is not shoot a bunch of rounds and blow up Tannerite and not learn marksmanship podcast. This is gunfighter life. Your goal, hopefully, most of the time, there's a time to go out and shoot and have fun, I get that. But your goal should mostly be to improve the talents that God's given you and to make them better. To he who has more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. Is your goal to just go out and turn that ammo into noise or to stockpile a buttload of ammo? Or is your goal to actually be able to hit your target effectively and actually be able to grow your talent and master the fundamentals and grow in marksmanship? So think about that when you're looking at on paper, or I guess that's kind of an old way of putting it, I guess, when you're looking at it on the screen. When you're looking at it on the screen, is it just the price per round that's important? Is your 9mm handgun zeroed for 124 grain or 147 grain? Is it maybe better to spend 18 cents a round or 21 cents a round on the good ammo that actually hits where you're shooting, or spend 16 cents a round and get crap ammo? Or not crap ammo, but ammo that's less accurate for you. There's a time for cheap ammo. I'm not saying that. I'm saying don't just look for the cheapest thing on the screen or on paper. If your purpose is just to get the cheapest ammo, then that might be fine. But if your purpose is something else, there's more to it than that. So, I guess to be circumspect and consider the totality of this podcast, don't just go by what's on paper or what's on the screen or what's the next new hot thing. Look, I like guns, I like ammo, I like to shoot, I like all that stuff. And I'm not saying not to consider that stuff, but consider how important it should be realistically for you. Are you buying it because it looks better on paper or because it's what's best for you? And sometimes you learn the hard way. I told some stories about me. I've certainly learned the hard way more than once. Going back to another story, I was telling you when I was a police officer, I was issued the Glock 22, and I thought, oh, I'm going to get a Glock 21. It's a double stack 45. And on paper, it looked great. On paper, it looked like, yeah, why wouldn't I get this instead of the Glock 22? I had enough wisdom to know that the Glock 22 wasn't great, But I thought that, like I said, bigger is better, more is better. Why not get the Glock 21? It's a double stacked 45. Well, because the thing is huge, and it's like for me, it's like, I liken it to me trying to hold onto a railroad tie and shoot it. It's giant and big and thick, and I don't have giant hands. And I could not hold that gun and manipulate it as effectively. I couldn't reach the controls without moving the gun in my hand. I'm not saying it's not a good gun, but for me, it was not the right gun. Because I bought it because what was on paper instead of actually getting out and running it and shooting it, or considering factors that were more important. And a big reason for this podcast is because I wanted to share wisdom and knowledge with you all, with this community, and give you real world firsthand experience and perspective. So if you can learn and get wisdom from somebody else who knows and has been there, I hope to share that with you. Blessings are not meant to be hoarded, they're meant to be shared and to help others. So I hope that this episode has been a help. If you would like to help out this podcast, this community, they are free to listen to. They are not, sadly, free to produce. If you'd like to support, like I said, the easiest and less monetary way is to just like, subscribe, and write a review of the podcast. If you want to support monetarily, you certainly can. You can go to Patreon and just type in Good Shepherd Training. It's the umbrella that does this podcast, Good Shepherd Training, or just type in Gunfighter Life on Patreon. You can give, $1 a month. It's probably something you can add into the budget if you're listening to this on a smartphone. So if you want to help support this community and this podcast, that would be great. I said Good Shepherd Training on Patreon. Check out Good Shepherd Training on Facebook, Good Shepherd Training on Instagram. If you like this podcast, you may also like the Alpha Male podcast. It is what it sounds like. And you may also like, if you care about the important stuff, Simple Man Sermons, the preachings of a simple man called by God to share the good news of Jesus Christ. It's for God to open the ears, open the heart. But I hope to preach the message and put it out there in simple terms, easy to understand. Simple, powerful truth. With that, guys, thanks for staying tuned till the end. I'll put out a little tactical tip here. If you are going out with your family, with people in the city, it may be advantageous for you. If you know the area you're going, in a certain city that you're going, if something bad happens, in general, communications go down, cell phones go down, things like that go down. If there's a giant event, an active shooter, a big earthquake, who knows what. If something, terrorist attack, something like that happens, communications are probably going to go down. It may seem like overkill, it may seem silly at the time, but if something bad ever did happen, this may be advantageous. Pick a rally point, or especially if it's somewhere you go commonly. If you go downtown somewhere and eat at a certain restaurant or something, you may say, hey, the rally point is going to be this. It's going to be the corner of this street and this street. If that's where the incident is, then the fallback rally point or the secondary rally point is going to be this. The primary rally point is going to be the stop sign at Elm Street and Main Street. And, the fallback rally point is going to be Ace Hardware, by the railroad tracks. So your kids know it, your wife knows it, whoever you're going out with, your friends know it. Just a simple thing, from the military, from experience. Something bad does happen and your comms go down and you're separated. At least you know a place where you can meet and find each other. Alright guys, with that,